warm welcome to you, Dr. Harini. It is really a pleasure to host you on a Cloud Chat session. This is the second in the series of Restoring Urban Ecology. And a very warm welcome to all the attendees. I would like to introduce our special guest today, Dr. Harini Nagendra. I'm sure most of you know her, and that is why you have come to join this session. She needs no introduction as such. She is an avid, ecologist, eminent ecologist, and she has written and authored books like Nature in the City, and she has given the perspective of Bangalore over the decades of change. And she has also written the book Cities and Canopies, which is her recent book. And she is a professor at Azim Premji University, and she has been working in the development department and primarily focused on urban ecology and sustainability as a subject. So very pleased to welcome you, Dr. Harini.
Thanks, Gayatri. It's a real pleasure to be here. And hello, everyone else who's joined the panel and everyone who's watching on Facebook.
Yeah, great. So we will start with, the journey that you had taken, because I'm sure you were born in, Tamil Nadu, Salem, and from there you moved to Bangalore when you were in Delhi for the first 10 years, and then you moved to Bangalore. And then probably your Bangalore journey started. And what molded you to take up sustainability as a career, and how did you, venture into that as an ecologist?
So for me, it's been, if you talk to many people who work on ecology, they will tell you that it came from long walks to forest areas or an early childhood history of bird watching or nature watching. My journey was definitely somewhat different. And in fact, I think that's interesting because I think you can come to ecology in so many different ways or come to nature in so many different ways. So I grew up first 10 years in Delhi. After that, I've been in Bangalore more or less all of my life. Except for short stints outside in the US and in Europe, but mostly in Bangalore. And I used to take a lot of walks with my parents in cities, Delhi, Bangalore, mostly more in Bangalore. And with my father, there were different kind of walks. They would be very brisk walks. We would walk for kilometers and kilometers, go for a couple of hours to different places. In Delhi, the Deer Park, in Bangalore, Cubbon Park, Lal Bagh, especially weekends. With my mother, who has a BSc in botany and was very fascinated by trees and plants and flowers. They're very short ambles, really. Because you would stop every 3-4 trees to stop and say, "You tell me this is this tree. Do you know why it has so many leaves? Look at, are they opposite each other? Let's take these petals apart." I didn't think of it, but both those childhood experiences, much later now, if I think of it, really influence the kind of interest I have with trees. But how I came to sustainability, I would have to say, is very much serendipity. So to me, I think life is full of chances. The chances we take, the path we take has many opportunities, and we should never close doors. So I actually started with a BSc in microbiology, chemistry, and zoology. I liked biology. I wanted to do something further. I didn't want to do medicine, which was the standard career path in those days if you wanted to do biology. And so I picked up microbiology. Along with its Bangalore University degree. So it had 3 majors, microbiology, chemistry, and zoology. And then I joined the Indian Institute of Science. They had just set up an integrated PhD program in biology, master's and PhD. So I was in the first batch. I joined, and I did a couple of years of rotation in the lab, in various kinds of labs. There were 7 different departments working in biology. But I found I hated lab work, and I really liked being in the field. So my PhD advisor, Madhav Gadgil, many of you might have actually heard of him with the Western Ghats expert panel, one of India's most best-known ecologists. I, by pure chance, stumbled into him giving a talk somewhere and then went up to him and asked if I could do a project with him. So it was a complete shift away from, I had no coursework in ecology, no background in ecology, and I went straight into a PhD in ecology with that. So I had to teach myself a lot of things, but it was a great learning experience because I came to it because I wanted to, and And it's interesting also because I think I talk to many people now who do sustainability or tree watching, or I met some people in Hyderabad who've been instrumental in stopping tree felling across a large road, and they're doing a lot of initiatives. And one of them told me that he said he was tree blind till he got married, and his wife knew all about trees, and she was so surprised. How can you not know all of these trees? And now he is one of Hyderabad's most passionate and most involved people who protects trees, does tree walks, raises. So I think that's really, I find that very inspiring because I think
because that means that it can be acquired
at any age. Yeah.
So how did you get into using technology into doing your work? Because your work has been mostly using, geosatellite information and imagery and surveying. So how have you been using that kind of
Uh-huh.
techniques?
So I think the important thing about anything related to sustainability or urban ecology is you need to use wide ranges of approaches. So we use a lot of methods. I was one of the earliest users of remote sensing in the Indian context for ecology, because India has always had an excellent series of satellites, and I think ISRO has been doing a great job in terms of that. But the uses in the days I started doing remote sensing, which is 1993-94,
Mhm.
were largely by the forest department in a very visual kind of mapping sense of landscapes. And the real, the power of technology with ecology is just beginning to be explored. So the Indian Institute of Science had a supercomputing system at that time, and you could link your computers in the lab to the supercomputing system. So I could do
Oh,
that,
okay.
and link to open source, the US Geological Service, which is their army,
Mm.
had set up very nice open source access remote sensing software. So I could use that, use images that we had, learn myself through the web. All of these technologies were starting there. The internet, there were Google search machines. I'm not Google,
Yeah.
but there were other search machines. You could ask somebody in different parts of the world. So I wrote to people in Germany and the US saying, how do you do XYZ? I have this problem.
Mm.
So that's really how it started. Completely, it had to be self-taught because there was nobody else really too much to ask at those
Mm.
times. But what it does not, satellites give you the view from the top. If you
Right.
want to know your city and you're planting trees, for instance, it's not good to only know your road. You should know what are the good places, where are the gaps between trees, where are the good chances for planting trees, where is the road space wide and sufficient enough, for example. So we
Yeah.
really need that spatial view, and remote sensing is very useful. We also use a lot of interviews with people, because people will tell you what they want, why they do certain things, why how they interact with ecology. So I think you need the remote sensing, you need the biodiversity, but you also need the very intimate social knowledge of people for ecology.
So over time, you would have seen that changing because I'm sure Google per se has come up with a lot of new technologies and tools.
Right.
In fact, in our project Prakriti also, we intend to use Google in a very detailed manner, especially with respect to time lapse. You know how the particular territory has changed over time versus trying to see overall what kind of patches, as you said,
Hmm.
what kind of patches have to be connected, green versus how the lake territory has changed over the years. So all of that is I mean, compared to your time versus now, how is that different?
It's a completely different world. I mean, Google has completely transformed a lot of these. We are using Google Earth Engine, which is a
Right.
different kind of software, which is also open access.
Yes.
We're trying to develop an automated system to map India's cities. So we've done it with 10 cities, and we're trying to see if we can scale it up to do it automated in an automated way with 100 cities.
Wow.
So, those are the kinds of things we are trying to look at to see how that would be put into place. And there are just so many things like this that we can actually try and establish or work with,
Mm.
was simply impossible before. Because the other thing with satellite images is they paint the landscape in different colors, and they're not at the scale. Google imagery, this especially Google Earth image, is very visual. Anybody can understand if you take it to them. So we are finding that very useful also to talk to people, because you show them a Google Earth image of their area and they can tell you the changes. So
Correct.
it really democratizes in some sense that technology. You don't have to spend years learning about it.
So all that which was only probably proprietary knowledge to institutes like IISc, now it is available to a common
To
man.
everybody, exactly. Yeah.
That's great. So that brings me to this, correlation because the latest happening in the world is COVID-19, and many people are turning around and now also realizing that sustainability is important. However, there is a big lot, and when it comes to framing policies versus taking decisions with respect to sustainability or climate change, I would say that still the focus that sustainability should have is not there.
Hmm.
So, what is, according to you, the situation, and how would you relate sustainability to COVID-19? And what should be the course of action that should be taken?
See, I think COVID-19 has, or at least should, teach us that we can't stay isolated from the natural world around us. I mean, what we're living through would have been something like science fiction if anybody told us about this, let's say even in December last year, when this disease was just beginning to spread through China. If somebody had said a virus would take over the whole world and the whole world would shut down. It's what you read about in fiction. But why is this virus spreading? It's because of certain changes between the way we live and the way we used to live. It's because of viruses increasingly now. It's COVID is, one particular COVID-19, this particular SARS-CoV-2 virus is one of many possible viruses that could have become pandemics. And the World Health Organization has been warning about that for years. It's because forests have connected to cities in ways that they never used to. People are going out into more and more distant areas, bringing wild animals. So the part of wild animal chain, which is becoming consumption for meat because of the exoticization of wild meat. Even in Bangalore, for instance, at the fringes of Bangalore, you will see reports that so many wild types of species are brought from different areas and trafficked for meat. And sold in the weekend, sold in illegal places. In Goa, you'll find frog legs are sold. All of these, what it gives you is basically you are changing the animal chain. Or let's say factory farming, you are feeding large factory farmed animals with bone meal, for instance, to make them grow fatter, or fish residue to make. So you're changing all of these. What was an ecological change, you're interfering with it. And I think that the repercussions of that we're seeing very clearly. So we need to, what it tells us is, I think we need to respect ecology first of all, but secondly, we need to figure out that we can't do quick fixes. Planting trees, for instance, where should you plant trees? Where should you not? We need to respect ecology as a set of processes and understand that just because we're in a city and living in an apartment complex and we can close the doors and windows and put on the air conditioning and drink bottled water, we can't isolate ourselves from all the impacts of ecology. We live embedded in ecology even in cities. So to me, that's the biggest lesson we should learn. Whether we are learning it, I'm very doubtful. Because if you look at what we're doing right now, we're only thinking of when will we go back to business as usual. Yeah. How many roads, infrastructure projects. Look at Bangalore. I mean, we're planning to cut down trees in the peripheral roads around Bangalore. The Hubli-Ankola railway line is going to come up, destroying so many lakhs of trees. If you think of the government also, national government, a lot of permissions have been given for tree felling to kickstart industrial growth because the economy is impacted because of COVID. But what we don't realize is these kinds of interventions can make new diseases like COVID come out.
Absolutely, right? Because it is not just one thing that we have to, overcome. This is just a warning sign by nature.
Yes, exactly.
I'm more capable than you. So, and still people are not getting that. So when it comes to governance, how do you think, if there is any suggestion from your end, because I'm sure many of the attendees who are attending this, they are working in the government sectors. So what would you like to, suggest, being somebody from academia?
I think the first thing which it would be very nice to do is to have much more of a better collaboration between academic research in many of these areas and governments. And that is happening. For instance, on the medical front in COVID, it's happening. We are clearly seeing that. But in many other fronts, for conservation, for instance, you need to have much better links. I think that is somehow fragmented with academics and government, forest department and all that, not really working together. Yeah. Similarly, in cities, you need to have urban planners working with city ecologists to try and plan the city better. You need much more collaborative work. I think that is one of the things that is really clear from our research. Yeah. And the second aspect is also that we need to, I think, involve people much more in our planning. Because anything that affects a government is the best place to have all kinds of initiatives that impact people, because really NGOs, civic sector, academics, community groups, we all need to work, but we cannot have the scale and influence and impact of government. So on the other hand, government is not there everywhere. They're not there in every lake. They're not there on every road. They can't be. So I think the only thing that will work is if we have this multi-level collaboration with all kinds of. In fact, Eleanor Ostrom, the first lady to get the Nobel Prize in Economics, with whom I worked for several years, she used to call it polycentricity. And she used to say nothing will work in cities especially unless different levels of, from the individual person doing their composting to the community groups working for lakes, to people working on traffic management, NGOs, civic groups, and governments at all levels, from panchayat to ward level management to the municipality, for instance. Unless all of us come together, nothing's going to change. So I think the real challenge for governance is how do you enable systems for collaborative governance? Unless you can have a system that allows people to talk to each other and respectfully take in each other's inputs, nothing will progress, because no one of us can be an expert on everything.
That's right. So when it comes to collaborative approach, you know about me, the decision that we have taken. It's too, bigger dream for a small organization to even, start executions.
Right.
But we have started with this exact approach. We are trying to create a collaborative approach. So Mission Prakriti is exactly trying to do that. We are trying
Right.
to bring in governments, and we are taking the veterans from Indian Army and taking communities and corporates together to take effective action when it comes to restoring ecology. So we are doing that by simple means of, doing lakes as well as erecting forests as much as
Right.
possible. And that too, we are trying to do multi-layered forestry so that there is larger impact relatively. So do you think an initiative like this does have a potential to change the way we are, to change the course where we are headed otherwise?
I
Maybe
think
we can have
it,
something else after COVID,
yeah, I think it definitely does. See, one lesson I think that I've been seeing clearly coming through 15 years of now research on cities is that when one initiative happens, let's say it's a lake restoration and people get through a solid waste management or traffic or whatever, like your food forest initiative,
Yeah,
for instance, it's not necessarily, we shouldn't judge it only at the success of that initiative alone.
right.
That initiative will be successful, some cases may not be successful, not your case, but maybe like citizens gather to save a lake or save a stretch of trees and that doesn't happen, somehow they get cut anyway. However, the networks, that contact, that positive energy that comes from people working together and inspiring other people,
Yeah,
that never goes away. So it only goes from strength to strength. So if the people that you have brought together at this point,
yeah,
if you map them 5 years, 10 years later, you will find that so many people have gone on to tackle so many new initiatives. What we've seen is somebody starts with lakes, they go to solid waste management, they start working with government schools, they work with traffic management, they work with city planning, they work with then governance inputs on ward management, massive tree plantations. Because once people feel, we are very living in very hopeless times, right? COVID, climate change, air pollution, I mean, wherever you look, a social crisis, you just forget. I mean, there are too many on the around, political crises, employment crisis, poverty. People tend to feel very hopeless. One thing that I see when many young climate activists, especially, if you ask them how are they hopeful, and so many youth movements have started on climate change, they will all
right.
tell you that because I act, I feel hopeful. It's not that the world gives me any hope, but the act of acting puts me in touch with like-minded people and I get hope. And so that, I
I can
think, to
totally
me
relate with that, actually.
exactly. So I think when you get people together, you shouldn't look at, can I achieve all my targets in 1 year, 5 years? Maybe you have ambitious targets. You should, because that will take you from you know step to step, and in 15 years you can really achieve big things.
Yeah, great. So I wanted you to, tell us some stories, especially the ones which you have learned from your interviews with the slums in Bangalore. So there are some very beautiful stories, and I would like you to share that with our audience as well. So,
Sure. So I was telling you the last time when we spoke that one of the things we learned about urban ecology is how important a role it plays in the lives of the poor. And I think what it does is we should flip our perception. We normally tend to think of people who are low income communities being the problem for the city. They live in slums, they're poor, they throw trash, they live in dirty places, they fall sick, and they pollute lakes, for instance.
yeah,
What we have learned in our research on slums is completely changed our entire mind view. So, for instance, across the places we have studied parks and high income wealthy neighborhoods, elite apartment complexes, the best parts of Bangalore, the old British colonial neighborhoods. The highest numbers of native species are where? In slums. I mean, it's not something that you will expect, because they don't have any space for trees. But in the smallest of crevices, they will take paint buckets, old utensils, battery cans, whatever they have at hand, and plant native species. And they plant them because they find that it gives them value in their meaning to their everyday life. But they also have a very intimate connection that I think is very inspiring, at least for me, and has been very humbling. So a couple of the stories I think I was telling you was, one, we had gone to this lady who had aloe vera in her backyard. And it's a very difficult place, overgrown rats and snakes, and no water. You have to pay for every pot of water. And it was a beautifully maintained little garden. So I said, why do you have this? So she said, my now married daughter had planted this aloe vera. She used to use it for face packs before she got married. And now I keep it in memory of her. And as I told you, I think I say it in Hindi and in Kannada. So in Kannada, she said, निम्नंथावरु पार्लर होगतारे नಮ್ಮंथावरिगे इदे पार्लर. Or in Hindi, it would be, आप जैसे लोग पार्लर जाते हैं, हमारे लिए ये हमारा पार्लर है. That is, for us, this is our beauty parlor. Right. You think of that. This, that little garden has to serve them everything. It is their hospital, it is their pharmacy, it is their cooking. They instead of buying greens from the market, that's where they buy their greens. So it is their vegetable shop, and it is their parlor, and it is their place for puja, for instance, because that's where they collect their flowers. Or this other lady that was an even more beautiful story. When first time I went, she had a lovely little strip of a garden on the edge of the road. The second time I went, that road had expanded and taken away her garden. She had her kitchen, roadside garden. So I went in. She had 6 pots precariously perched on that tiny little wall of hers, all with tulsi. So I asked her, I said, why do you have 6 pots with tulsi? Again, what is the problem? Soil, you have only space for 6 pots. Clearly, you love your garden. Yeah. She said, no, I prepared the pots very nicely when I lost my garden. I prepared them with manure and mud and everything. And I went to visit my daughter. I came back a few days later, and the wind had blown seeds of tulsi and they had germinated. So I said, okay, so you had 6 pots of tulsi. Why did you change it? I'm very practical. I have a large garden, but I would take out 6 pots and put, 1 tulsi and 5. She said, no, it's an atithi. It's a guest. It came into my garden. How can I turn it away? So I'm nourishing 6 pots of tulsi. I mean, just the compassion, that imagination, the generosity, it leaves you very shaken. So you have to really invert your I think our traditional thinking about these places.
Yeah. Any more stories on the same lines, and how does that relate with the urban folks when you compare that?
So another study we've been doing now, we wanted to know about wild places, when people forage for weeds. So if you look at it traditionally, the Bangalore that I grew up in, we would, if I had a mouth sore, for instance, there's this kashi sappu which grew wild. Nobody grew it in their houses. You would go and find it in some plot, come back, and my mother would make something of it, and we would have it for mouth sores. Many things like that, little things, something for itching. Now I see there are very few of these open places, and there is very few this knowledge of what to collect, because even I don't know what they look like in many places. My mother knew, So we started doing this very interesting study where people went out into different parts, from Alsur to Banashankari, all the way to the edges of Bangalore, outskirts, Talghatpura, which is just outside the city. And what you find is it's women in low-income communities who carry all this knowledge in their head. So they're complete ecological knowledge repositories. And between them, they know, very easily, if you ask 2-3 of these women, they will tell you 75 to 80 species of little plants, weeds, that they know. This is good for throat pain, that is good for joint pain, this one will make you brighter if you're a kid and you read it and you want to go for exams, So many things. In Banashankari, there's a thriving market where women sell these, and their customers will come and tell them, I want half a kilo of this 2 weeks from now. So that she'll go and forage and come back.
Oh, wow.
And that is a knowledge that we are losing, because in Alsur, for instance, now they say there's no place for them to do this, because they're fenced off the lakes. All of these wild places are no longer free for them. The army lands are fenced. They used to go to, for instance, Lal Bagh you can't access anymore, and you're not allowed to pick. So it's only Talghatpura that has the ecological knowledge. What will happen 15 years later back to Bangalore? We would have lost this nutritional diversity, this ecological knowledge, this way of living with nature. And we would have gained a knowledge of how to grow lawn grass or turf grass, very nice looking places, ornamental hedges, etc. But this is a different knowledge of biodiversity. This is a very experiential knowledge of biodiversity. So that's what to me is real urban ecology. People interacting with nature and keeping that diversity and that wisdom intact.
So how much do you think people are, accommodating of inviting nature? Because especially in the urban areas, I think people are too used to having manicured lawns. If at all they want to see some greenery, the whole concept of greenery is very different for them. So being from the same sector, I think we do understand the importance of indigenous plants and those species. But the whole concept of an urbanite when it comes to greenery and all, I'm sure that you would relate to that. That how do we, get them educated on, understanding the indigenous value of ecology?
See, I think you got the heart of it. That is something we've really struggled with. Some corporates are extremely open. So we work with some corporate groups. So you must know, since you're from Wipro, the Wipro Electronic City campus, where I and several other colleagues have worked with. So they had a traditional, lawn manicured setup and with a water body. We've torn up that entire thing, made a much more natural flowing water body, and a set of plants that attract so many butterflies. In certain times of the year, you'll see thousands, tens of thousands of butterflies. But how do you do that? So if for people, you have to message it very differently. So we turned the negative into a positive. We said one of the things in any corporate campuses, the gardening staff will straight away tell you, madam, all of this is fine, but I have to use pesticides and spray everything, because if there are holes in my leaves when foreigners come towards the place, so they tell you we're very open. We'll have foreign dignitaries coming, and my HR manager will come and yell at me if they see leaves on the holes in the leaves. So we said, how do we deal with this? Then within Wipro came the suggestion that let's message it differently. So put out actual, big boards saying, if you see a hole in your leaves, that means you're doing a good thing. Because if you have holes in your leaves, they're made by caterpillars. If you have caterpillars, butterflies will come. You lay out that entire chart.
That's a small story, which is not a great story to share. But one of my neighbors, he was that day, and that was the first time I saw caterpillars so closely. They're so
Huh.
good-looking creatures, and he was throwing each of them on the road. And I went
Huh.
and asked him that, Uncle, why are you doing this? I mean, they'll be killed. So he said, anyway, they will be killed wherever you throw them, but they are eating away my plant, so I have to remove it. He had a flowering plant, and he removed about some 15 caterpillars.
Huh.
So that's when I got into thinking that if caterpillar is there, is it helping or is it really harming the plant?
See, too many caterpillars will harm your plant. So then any organic gardener struggles with this. But you will see that if you start growing food, that's the other very interesting thing. We did a small survey of all the different kinds of home gardens in the city. And most home gardeners will grow some food, especially in the Bangalore context, not just only ornamental, they will have roses, etc., but they'll also have food. In their own patch of vegetable garden, they will never use pesticides. They will use neem oil or something like this, or some way of throwing the caterpillars. But with that, they will typically have some way of living in harmony with that also. So this man was throwing caterpillars into the field, but what many of us do, for instance, if I have too many on my plants, I also take them off. But I will put them on something else, maybe my mango tree. Maybe something on the road which I have planted on the edge of my road, and I don't mind putting it there because that's okay. And now the question is, if you don't know enough, you might be putting it on the wrong tree. So you might be taking a Baron's caterpillar that lives on mangoes and putting it in the wrong place. But at least then you start learning. Then you go and look up, right? After some time, if you see 3 kinds of caterpillars, you'll find yourself Googling, what is this caterpillar? Which is its host species? So that process is educating ourselves, also. Because maybe our parents and grandparents had this naturally. You walked around with your uncle or grandmother and she would just tell you all of this. We have to re-educate ourselves because we've lost this knowledge. Because I also saw there's a question that asked about how do we restore this biodiversity knowledge. I think a lot of it is now, in some sense, the tools are really well available, so much that you can learn, ask friends, ask on chats, put up, Facebook group or an Instagram group. People are so willing to help because there's excellent naturalists everywhere who would be willing to help. Once you learn, you will pass it on to all the people around you. But it's that, I think for us, it's the process of opening our eyes. We tend to think that biodiversity is only large trees or a spectacular set of butterflies or maybe an elephant. But there's so many of these tiny, how many ants do we have in our house, for instance? How many species of ants are moving around?
Yeah.
All the little things are part of the magic of life. And once you open your eyes to magic, you will keep picking that up.
Great. So I'll just request you to share some ideas and thoughts that you had, inscribed in your 2 books. So Nature in the City as well as Cities and Canopies. So there are some, brilliant ideas which many of them who have read it must be knowing, but I'm sure there is a lot for others to learn.
Sure. So Nature in the City is a book I wrote in 2016 based on what was at that point 10, 11 years of research in Bangalore. And it was trying to share the ecological journey of Bangalore. So one of the most interesting things I found there in that book was that if you look at the long history of Bangalore, it's a very unusual old city. It's a city which was created in a place which is what you call a semi-arid environment, very little rainfall. No
Okay.
large bodies of water, no perennial, no Ganga, no Jamuna, no coastal areas, right? Where is our perennial source of water? It doesn't exist. And and it's been populated for at least 8,000 years. You'll find these old monolithic stone tombs, where megalithic stone tombs, which tell you at least 8,000 years people have been living there. Very unusual. All old settlements spring up around water. So what did people do? What we can see documented in inscriptions is that people actually improved this landscape. So as they started settling in at least up to the past 1,500 years, when you have stone inscriptions, groups of people would come into a place, find any local site that was lower in the ground, in a depression, scoop out the mud, remove all the weeds and the plants, and create what we call these lakes now, tanks, as they used to be irrigation tanks. So hold water in that and create a cascading system. So the tank above, you will create a channel or deepen the natural channel so that water will then flow to the tank below and the tank below. Create wells around that, large open step wells, and wetlands, and start planting paddy and things like that, so that no water goes waste. Then they would plant trees, and a lot of these were local fruiting trees. What did we always plant? We had wooded groves with jackfruit, with mango, with tamarind, with banyan or some peepal tree. Very large trees support biodiversity. Grass grows under them, so you can have goats and cows and support grazing, and you can eat, fruits also from this. What do you get if you plant? I love rain trees. I love copper pods. I love gulmohar. So this is nothing against them. But if you plant them in a city, you don't get food from them. Whereas what we planted traditionally, cities are such scarce spaces. Now there are such few trees. I think we need to go back to those principles to think multifunctionally. How can you have a tree that gives you shade, but also protects the groundwater, but also gives you pollution relief, but also gives you fruit, also gives you maybe some, like the Hongemia gives you oil that people can use for lamps. So we have to think in these different ways with people. So that is, to me, one thing that the nature in the city taught me. How older, not just generations, millennia, thousands of years of civilization, we moved into Bangalore by improving the city, planting trees, creating more water bodies, and how in a short space of about 50, 60 years, we just broke down that relationship. So what are we always thinking in a city? Oh, it's a city. There's no place for people to live in harmony with nature here. But what this tells us is that people always lived in harmony with nature, especially in cities. That's what supported the growth of cities. So we shouldn't forget that knowledge. So that, to me, is the core of nature in the city. Cities and canopies, with my colleague and friend Seema Mundoli, it was a very different approach. So we had one deep history of Bangalore. Then we thought we should do something very similar for all, that applies to all cities across India, and try and figure out how would this work with not just all cities across India, but also give people a more experiential appreciation of trees. See, how would normally you or I go out to look at a tree? If we are not a scientist, we will hug the tree, we would like to climb the tree, we would like to pluck a flower and take it apart. People write poems about their favorite trees. People eat snacks, even the gulmohar, for instance, you can cook with or the tamarind flower, you can make into bhajis. You think of trees in very different ways. You make musical instruments with them. So we thought, what happens is often when you write a book about trees, it's full of facts, and they should be facts, but we should make it much more about than facts. It should be like you are actually interacting with the tree. So we wrote a book about common trees of Indian cities, but also put in a lot of these. There are recipes. It's two women writing a book, so we have to have recipes, and we have to have a lot of games that people play with the trees. Gulmohars, you put the nails. I don't know if you've ever done this. You have these scarlet tipped nails when you put the staples on the ear. Or other games you play with tamarind seeds, or riddles are about trees. So it's a book with a lot of things that are thrown in. And what we found is, therefore, it really resonated with people, because people who love trees is exactly the way they engage with them, not just through fact or science.
And that is very important, because ultimately the whole idea of sustainability has to percolate to the common masses. So that's why it is very important to
Exactly.
mainstream the whole idea of sustainability than just keeping it to the people who are researching. And
See, people tend to somehow think of sustainability as a very boring or an how to put it, an ascetic thing. You
I
have to
think
give up a lot to
we
be
got to
sustainable.
rename it probably because the term sustainability is too big and sounds very alien, you know.
It sounds very sort of too many people, many of us, I think, listening to this are already pro sustainability. But I'm sure you will all agree with me that if you go talk to people, they will say, "Oh, it's very difficult. You know, I can do it later. Right now, I have a lot of things to look at."
Yeah.
It should be fun and joyous because it is fun and joyous, right? So,
By the whole terminology, I think it is not very inclusive in the way people should take it.
yeah, exactly.
So great. So one more question that often keeps coming again and again, because I'm sure many people joining this talk through Facebook, YouTube, or through the Zoom session, they are heading their in their respective companies, the CSR or the sustainability division. So what do you think CSRs and corporates should be focused on when it comes to adapting urban ecology? So, what are the things that missing links in the piece, and what needs to be done in order to have a more collaborative approach?
I think there's a lot that needs to be done. So, having interacted with a lot of CSR initiatives, I think the people who run these initiatives are extremely passionate. But unfortunately, the structure that within their work, which they work, is often so confining that what they'll end up doing is once a year they have. I mean, we discussed this, right? So once a year during Earth Day, they have some kind of an initiative. They call somebody in to give a lecture. Everybody turns up. Doesn't like. Nobody dislikes nature. Everybody will turn up. Then they have a tree plantation exercise. Everybody plants trees on that weekend and then goes back and it's business as usual. And that's really not how you should engage with it. All the approaches or the idea is that CSR likes to look at really important issues that plague India, such as poverty or public health or child education. Those are very important things. But if you think of the whole idea of sustainability, I think it's the idea that everything is interconnected to the world we live in. So I think corporates can look at, for instance, child education and see how to connect education with nature. If you have a part of your company or some other area, so for instance, Toyota in Bangalore
Yes.
in Jigni has this entire setup where they're planting a lot of trees. But what they're trying to do with that is creating one particular place, which is an education center. So you try and imagine how this landscape looked 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1000 years ago, and recreate that vegetation, that setup and then take kids through that. So that's an education center. So you're weaving in your biodiversity or your little tree planting area with education for children. You can similarly do this with rainwater harvesting. You know, create rainwater harvesting areas because Bangalore we know is going through such a water crisis, and see how do we link that with some other kind. Maybe you create water and that water goes to a government school which is suffering for lack of water. So there are so many other things, or create food forests for your employees like you're doing. I mean, every place has lawns. Every corporate setup which is large enough will have lawns. To me, we should just get rid of the lawns because they are pesticide intensive, herbicide intensive, and pointless from a biodiversity perspective. They're just water guzzlers. So convert that into food forests. Either plant greens that employees can come in and harvest. Look at the other spillover benefits. Your employees will get fresh food to take home. Their pesticide levels in their food will come down. They're spending time outdoors. They will be happier and more engaged with, they'll come back and work better. If that is your metric, they will come back
Air
and work
quality
better once they've
increases
done
on
and got better.
campus.
Absolutely. And as people start doing this, they will get more engaged in sustainability. So I think focusing on poverty alleviation, for instance, if you look at slums, the best thing you can do is plant drumstick trees or give them enough pots that they can plant a lot of the greens that they want or
We are
micronutrients.
planting a lot of drumstick trees. We call it moringa trees. A lot of them in the food forest.
Fantastic. Yeah, because it's the best superfood. Across Bangalore in the 1980s, they did an entire program planting drumstick trees. And those trees are so valued by people. You think of how many generations of kids that they have helped prevented from being malnourished.
Yeah, true.
So all of this should go into CSR initiatives.
And if not anything else, even your air conditioning loads, you can actually reduce your air conditioning loads because your
Hugely.
delta of temperature will be, I'm sure you can tell it precisely how much lower it would be.
Yeah, 30 to 40%. You just plant trees on the right side, the sun-facing
That's a
side of your buildings.
great reduction, no?
That's a huge reduction, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm sure there is a clear business case for corporates to engage into this, and all the people, probably CSR heads, who are thinking that this year we have focused on COVID-19, so we don't have, this is not a priority area. So, what would be your message for such people? Because they are still seeing that as a disjoint thing and it is not connected. So,
Exactly. Yeah. See, so many simple things. If you're thinking, why are we interested in COVID-19? We're interested because it impacts health. Even
correct.
if you just take health, I mean, we have studies where we looked at street trees in Bangalore, and they reduce certain kinds of, they reduce particulate matter pollution by about 50%. They reduce sulfur dioxide hugely. They reduce these nitrous oxides hugely. So just plant them in areas of your campus which are road facing, and your employees, all the pollution related health problems will reduce dramatically. Or as I said, plant vegetables and those kinds of greens that you can have, or drumstick that employees can eat and balance their public health requirements. There are so many aspects of this, that, or mental health. I mean, I think this is one thing we really should, as all of us know, stress in cities is at an all-time high. And I'm sure many corporate environments, mental health issues are especially high because of the kind of environments, high stress in the room constantly. And we have interviewed so many corporate employees who say that nature is their big stress relief. So if you have an environment around which is very green and full of trees, I mean, I think the business case is straight there. Not even the human case also is there, right? You want happy employees. If employees are not happy coming into your campus, why would they work there?
Your overall productivity actually drops in. I mean, drops significantly if your employees are not
Exactly,
happy.
hugely. Yeah, yeah.
So great.
Instead of having happy hours and things like that, you should have
Yeah,
happy tree planting days. We have to think very differently.
absolutely. I think we got to be a little creative in, suggesting some of these ideas to corporate so that this becomes more mainstream as an idea for CSR.
Exactly, yeah.
Great. So one more question, and with that, we would like to conclude this session, and then we will leave the room open for the questions from the audience. So
Sure.
the question is, how can we, because a lot of people who have registered for this webinar, I mean, more than 150 questions were around this point, that how as an individual I can contribute to my ecology, like what can I do for my cities, what can I do for the
Right.
environment?
Right. I think that's a very important question. And as we were discussing, these are hopeless times. I mean, you tend to feel as so much more from employees, from friends,
Yeah.
from family, from especially younger people. I find COVID times have been very anxious times for everybody, and very understandably so. And then you look at other things, climate change or societal issues, and then you just, so everyone wants to now know what can they do, because I think everyone really wants to do something about it. There are a number of things as an individual that we can do, and I think the most important thing is to realize that if you're thinking of sustainability, it's not this mountain that you have to climb. And somebody, I read it very, one of the climate change people that I follow on Twitter, she is very pragmatic about this. She says, I also want certain luxuries of life. So all I've put for myself is a target that every year I will reduce my own footprint by 10%.
Okay.
And so you're not going back to, I think that's again the challenge. Many of us, and I really admire people who can do that, would go and live much simpler lives.
Yes.
Maybe your structure of life doesn't allow you to, or maybe you don't want to. What can you do? All of us can compost. All of us can say that we are going to put, for instance, not buy takeout from places that sell us too much plastic, or try and reduce the consumption of plastic in our daily lives. All of us can say that we will recycle our newspapers or try and go more online. Those are the little things that we can do. All of us can say, even if I have an apartment balcony, I will grow a few plants there and try and learn. I can't start completely buying from the market, but I will try and learn how it is to eat some of my food grown locally, so I can understand how difficult it is to grow food. So there are many of these little pieces that we can all do.
Yeah.
Rainwater harvesting is a big one that has huge impact. So two of the things you can really do is start rainwater harvesting. Second is to compost and reduce your trash by as much as you can. So do those two things. I think as an individual, you would have huge impact. But I think the other things we should start doing is start thinking, how to go beyond us as individuals. So much is made of taking your own bags when you go shopping, and I'm very sympathetic to it. I also do the same thing. But if you get plastic bags, they're probably 1 or 2% of the city's trash. The bulk comes from Amazon or Flipkart or your large, Swiggy deliveries, Zomato deliveries. And so there we need to go beyond us as individuals and think of us as civic groups or societies. Start whatever it takes, tweet storms or PILs, or just talk to people around you, or some kind of social pressure. See if your apartment complex can say that you'll reduce certain kind of deliveries. Amazon has recently committed to going off plastic packaging across India, at least in the 6 largest centers. That's all because of a schoolboy who started a petition and now has a PIL against this waste, that. So there is so much that individuals can do which is beyond themselves. Now, many people, when you say this, will say, I don't want to agitate on the roads, I'm not an activist. Don't have to be one. Then work with the community to say, okay, in my apartment complex, can we do common composting of trash? Can we all, for instance, take our waste and collect it and segregate it and use it, sell it somewhere so we know it goes to a recycling plant? Whatever your appetite is, now each of us will have our own menu. But all I'm saying is, sometimes individual action is very important, but sometimes it can be a distraction because you don't think of going beyond your individual self.
Sure.
And so these are such challenges that it requires people talking to people. So how, as an individual, can you connect with other people, whoever those people are, to do something as a group effort?
So you're saying that as an influencer, you can play a much larger role than just limiting yourself to your individual social.
Absolutely. And I think one thing we realize in COVID times or in climate change times is, it's a very interesting thing about psychology. We don't really trust experts as much as we think we do. In uncertain worlds, we actually trust people that we trust. So if I, let's say, start composting and I'm personally influenced by it, 5 people in my immediate neighborhood who like me and trust me will follow mine. And then 5 people will follow them. And so the multiplier effect goes. Mm-hmm. So you can have a huge influence in your own personal sphere in nucleating change. And I think many of us are not aware of that influence because we haven't tried it before.
Okay, great. So that brings us to the close of our discussion, and I'll just be, hinting at some of the questions that are asked. First question is from Lakshmi Narayanan. That is, you say about collaboration between government and academia or research. I would rather see if I can make him ask the question himself. 1 second. Okay, I'm not able to find among these people. So I'll just read out the question. So it is he or she, I'm not very clear. So you say about collaboration between government and academia research and public participating in various levels. Do you think going online, thanks to COVID, can bring more collaborative approach?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question because I think because of COVID, many of us have stopped, at least most of us are limiting going out. We only go out to attend, important meetings or what needs to be done on the ground, like relief work, etc., which needs to be done on the ground. So I think many people are now figuring out collaborate online. There was so much always to having meetings online. Let's meet face to face. This is not going to happen online. I think what this is part of it. Many of us are now far more comfortable with collaborations online, which really helps because let's say you're a busy government officer and you want to get a meeting with them. It's much easier to really get a meeting with them on their phone when they're traveling from place A to place B, for instance, or get group networks going. So I think this online collaboration moves us to different forms of collaboration that were not possible, which may be easier to fit into busy urban lives. If you have to go to any place, otherwise in Bangalore, it takes you half a day to just go somewhere and come back, right? And then that limits the amount of things that you can actually try and fit into your life. So I think, yes, hopefully, yes, that this has opened our way to different kinds of collaborations.
Okay. Another question is from Mr. Mahesh. Mr. Mahesh Krishnamurthy is our advisor, and I'll just see if I can find him here. And yeah, 1 second. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Hi,
yes, we
good afternoon. Hi, Harini. Enjoying your talk very much, learning a lot. Great discussion between both of you, Gayatri and Harini. Quick question. I'm not sure it's as incisive as some of the other questions that might be out there, but I'm wondering, Harini, based on the energy level that you exhibit, your enthusiasm, your passion, which is so obvious. As you teach and as you try to influence people, are you finding that your touch transforms them and leaves them walking away having learned more, perhaps to adopt different lifestyles, different practices, to grow those plants in their backyards or on their balconies, and to avoid using more plastic and so on and so forth. Fundamentally, my question is, how can we influence people without being didactic? Without just to do it in a very holistic manner.
Right. Thanks. So thanks. I'm glad that you're here and enjoying the talk, and that's a very thoughtful question. What I find actually is that the students, I think, teach me far more than I have taught them, and this is including all kinds of people with short courses, single interactions. I think young people are so full of energy these days, and the kinds of things they're doing, very impressive. And so what we find is, I've seen 12-year-olds telling me about parts of Malaysia, for instance, and they will tell you very sweetly that in my lifetime I have seen a change in trees, and I'm very sad that things are disappearing in my lifetime. And it's very sad if you think a 12-year-old is telling you that she has seen ecological loss in her lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So what I also, on the positive side, I find that many of these children inspire their parents to do something differently, or the young people inspire their parents to do something very differently. What can we do to influence this? As I saw your question, how can we try and encourage? So I'll give you some examples of things that we have done and are doing, for instance. So we did this entire project on greens and trying to look at wild weeds and what people are using. And now with the people who have done this, actually the main people who have done this is a very young woman researcher and a very young undergraduate student whose mother I know, and I've seen him from when he was a kid. So he and this other slightly older girl went out to all these places and found this information. Now they want to do a book. So they're doing a book called Chasing Sukku. The idea is beautiful. The name is beautiful. It came from them. What we are doing as a university is giving it them the scope to make it into a book. So they have little sketches, they have paintings, they have these, how do you identify these plants, and they have recipes collected from these women. If it wasn't for COVID times, we would have actually gone to some of these houses and videoed little YouTube little videos on cooking, but we plan to do this sometime. Mm-hmm. So create a bilingual book, English and Kannada, how to find these weeds, how to isolate them, how to cook with them, create a movement around these. There's actually a person called Suresh who's doing this so well called Sarjapura curries. And if any of you have seen this, if not, please go look it up. Sarjapura curries in Sarjapur Road. He lives originally from one of the villages of that area, and he has resurrected so many traditional varieties of seeds and plants and gives them out for free to people in a very interesting way. So he gives you these seeds without payment. All you have to do is grow the first crop, let it go to seed, don't harvest. Return him the seeds so that he can propagate these to other people. And then you start growing it yourself. So it's a wonderful workshop. He has a WhatsApp group, I'm part of it. He sends you recipes. People like these are amazing. So I think my role as an academic would really be to find people like this, because none of us can do this on our own, and network people to people. So if we can get that, I think half of this job is done, or maybe most of it is done, because there are incredible people out there doing all kinds of really inspiring things.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And I guess at the end of the day, it's all about creating some structure and process and finding ways to institutionalize all this, right?
Exactly. To institutionalize it, that is our big challenge, to move it beyond the personal agenda, to make it very large scale enough to impact the city.
Sure. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks, Gayatri.
Thanks, Mahesh. Swati, you had a question as well, right?
Yeah, good afternoon, and thanks for that inspiring speech, ma'am. I am from Mumbai, and here, in big societies, planting big trees is a problem. I mean, convincing members for planting big trees is a problem, because as per them, trees present a nuisance. The leaf litter, the water accumulation, and all those things are really hard to convince. So how to convince people? And second question was, what is your opinion about the urban forests, okay, city forests? being grown in different cities, how do they really add to the biodiversity in the city? Thank you.
Sure. Your first question is very important, Swati. We've been hearing stories of the same thing. People say they like leaves, but they don't know what to do with all the leaf litter. Or they say we're trying to plant trees in our apartment, but people are worried that if there are branches next to their balconies, thieves can come in. So we have a large list of very interesting reasons why people don't want trees. And that's actually, it is very difficult to combat that. One of the, I think, long-term things we have to do is really education. I think unless people have engaged with trees and seen the fun parts of trees, many people who you would see saying these things have never really dealt with trees because you would know how to live with trees. What can you do to convince them? I think it would be very difficult to work with a society like this, for instance, to say plant a tamarind or plant a peepal or plant a jamun. But you could probably work with them to say plant neem by getting, capitalizing on another fear of theirs, that there's air pollution. Or plant pongamia. These are in small places. For instance, if you look at the neem, that there's a taproot, so it goes deep, so it's really not going to impact your plumbing lines or all the other concerns that people have in these smaller apartment complexes. And neem is good for fresh air. Pongamia is good for fresh air. Drumstick will give you something that, as you could call it, a superfood. So find some trees that is your sneaking entry point. And once you have one tree, hopefully you can start changing the idea or the ethos. But you have to get them to understand something that is of direct benefit to them. So I think neem, for instance, in a COVID time, it's excellent to plant neem by just telling people that it purifies the air, and it does purify the air. So that's you just have to find that one entry point that will resonate with people. And there are some entry points. Hopefully, down that line we can then move to better and better more trees, but at least it gets you few trees that you can do. What your second question again, what was it? I forgot.
Dense city forests,
city forests, yes, right. So I have mixed feelings about these. I think overall the idea of city forests is excellent. We need to have more forests back in our cities. In some cases, it depends on what you call a city forest. You should be planting and calling a city forest. And unfortunately, often we just count the numbers of trees. We don't count the kind of biodiversity or the quality of ecological connection that they bring to us. So I don't want to make it a binary. I am not one of those people who say only native species, because you see a lot of species. Tamarind is not native. It's naturalized. It's been there for so long. We can't think of it as not an Indian tree. So there is a complexity to this ecology. I won't say only plant native. However, obviously, we shouldn't be planting something like eucalyptus in a lake bed. So think strategically about the trees that you want to plant in an urban forest. The second thing is, often a lot of these Miyawaki forest or these certain kinds of planting methods may not be the best suited to Indian cities, not because they don't grow well. They grow very well. But I think one can look at less expensive ways of planting them. We can modify Miyawaki approaches. We can modify certain approaches to try and create dense kind of areas that can still give us some kind of use. My third main important thing about urban forests is we need to think creatively about them. So I think, as I was saying last time, we have to be multifunctional. There's such scarce place space is our biggest challenge for trees in a city, especially in a growing Indian city. So they have to be multifunctional. They have to be good at pollution control, water purification. They have to be food providing. They have to be shade providing. So you shouldn't plant a royal palm, for instance, at one end of the spectrum, but rather plant a neem or something that gives you shade all the year round. Hot Indian cities. So it has to be multifunctional. And the fourth is, we should go beyond forests, because if we only look at planting, you need a half hectare, you need 3 hectares, you need a largish area, we will find we have very few places. We must do these urban forests in conjunction with linear corridors, roadsides, canal sides, stormwater drains, sewage drains, edge of houses. Every house should have a tree or two. Every apartment should be forced to have a few trees. That kind of network coupled with food forests is what I think we need, because otherwise just a few urban forests in a city will really help hugely transform the lives of people around them, but they won't do much for the rest of the city. So that has to be part of a very large citywide approach to aggressive reforestation of the city.
I'll request other participants also to ask the questions, because we'll have to close the session in some time. We are already overshooting. So, Mr. Narayan Gopinath, do you want to take your question next?
Yes, I thank you, Gayatri. Dr. Harini, in between your talk, you mentioned about one tree name from which we can take the oil for lighting the diya.
Yeah.
So that is the first time I'm hearing we can take from a tree. So I was curious because you just mentioned the name once. Can you repeat it or put it on the chat?
It's the Pongam or Pongemia pinnata, what we call Honge in Kannada or Pongam in Tamil. So that, in fact, if you go across Bangalore and you see, you will find if there are many honge trees on the roadside, and so Seema Mundoli, my colleague in the book Cities and Canopies, when she lived in Malaysia, there was a lady who worked as a domestic help in one of the houses, but during that particular season, she would collect the seeds from the honge mara, go home and dry it, and then give it to a local mill. And so the oil that you get from that, you can use for lighting diyas. It's used across Bangalore, low calorific value, but for diyas, it's perfect. And so many women do this, and they actually get the income from it. Because see, they're street trees, so the seeds fall on the tree or on the road. And so women use this, and they supplement their income by selling these small bottles of oil to various places, or selling the seeds to merchants who make oil from them. So it's a livelihood support, as well as it gives you a way of lighting your diyas and
household consumable.
Household consumable, more sustainable use. You don't have to use other kinds of oil for your diyas.
Yeah, because can you please spell a name on the chat so that I can search it on Wikipedia if possible?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I'm not from Bangalore or Karnataka, so I can't.
Yes, I have added it on the chat.
On the Zoom?
Yes, on the Zoom webinar chat, Pongema Pinata, I have added the name.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr.
Thanks a lot.
Do you want to take the question next? Hello. Nishant, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. So do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gayatri. Hello, Harini ma'am. Thanks for this opportunity. Sorry if this question becomes too clumsy. Can you read it yourself? So I wish to ask, how can or should we define nature? Because as soon as we utter the word nature, it paints certain pictures in our heads, definitely for the privileged ones, and leaves almost no clear idea for the underprivileged to associate with. Even when we take the consideration of local terminologies like Prakriti in Hindi, there must be similar words in different languages within India. So, your comments, please.
Sure. So I see your point. When we talk about nature as an overarching theme, that is something that we use more in English or maybe in Sanskrit or certain kinds of more how do I put it, quote unquote educated ways of looking at it. However, what I see is, in fact, from our research, that the best knowledge about nature we have gained actually by interacting with people that we call underprivileged. And like I was describing in the slums, you talk about grazers, and you talk to the fishers, and you talk to the fodder collectors next to any lake. And we've done a lot of that. And what we see is their knowledge of every little tiny species and the connections between them are far more. There we don't use words like nature. We would use actually words like gida, mara, neeru, so water, trees, plants. How do you relate to those? Or ask them about the fish and the thing. You won't use the larger word nature. However, they will come back often, and you see the incredible diversity of spiritual traditions that we have when they come back to tell you that this tree is our goddess, or that lake has our goddess. And there are stories like, so there is a whole complexity here in the area where I live in, part of Bangalore, about 7 sisters who are sisters of Munishwara. And the sisters' names, by the way, change in different parts of Karnataka and Andhra also, and possibly in Tamil Nadu. But the idea is the same. So there is one of the sisters who likes wild places. So she will never be next to the village, but she's locally below several trees, and often they are banyan trees or peepal trees. And those trees are keystone areas, and you will find that highways which otherwise go through everything, there are highways that are diverted to avoid a tree because the goddess was asked, the goddess who lives in the tree, and she refused to allow the highway to do that. So even the people who run these highways respect the goddess, and still, you have centuries old trees that are protected in these sites. That kind of information, I mean, if those are the people that we are calling underprivileged, definitely they have very little influence in ways that we do, but they have influences in other ways that we don't, and I've seen that their knowledge of nature is far beyond. Definitely there we wouldn't call it nature, so I completely get your point about the words and the terminologies we use. But I also, I mean, personally, I've seen that most of our learnings, actually, the richer learnings have come from interactions with people who are much more closely engaged, because for them they're engaged with the mud and the soil and the plants around them far more every day than we are.
Yeah, the real reason for me to put this question was for a lot of people who are starting to learn about nature and conservation and sustainability. And because the whole media is so gravitated towards how West tries to put it, somehow what you just reiterated holds a lot of meaning.
Right.
That there's a lot for us to learn from our backyards than
Absolutely.
rush around for a global picture.
Okay, so we'll just take the last question. Mr. Daniel, would you like to take your question? And after that, we'll just wrap up.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. See, when the pollution was less from India, we could see the Burj Khalifa because the air was so clear, or from some parts of India. Before we couldn't see, but we can see the permanent snow in the Himalaya, etc. So these are possible. These indicate that a lot of air pollution reduced, especially cities like Delhi also. Now this all happened because of the COVID situation and less movement of people and less traffic, etc. We want the COVID and the restrictions go, but the other positive effect should stay back. So what would be the learning out of it, and how can you preserve the positive effects?
Right. I think that's a very important question we should be asking ourselves in these times, because, I mean, living in Bangalore where I am, the Belandur lake that was so dirty, or the Vrishabhavati valley that was frothing, all of that has come down. Yamuna river, we've heard, that doesn't froth anymore. You have peacocks coming into different parts of the various cities, or Nilgai coming into Gurgaon, all kinds of stories that you see. And as you say that, you can see the Himalayas from parts of Delhi that you could not for years, or Punjab. Now, if you get a sense of how should we really think about this, I think we need to keep that imagination. Long ago, I was in a very interesting street side exhibition in Paris, where they were trying to talk about how the city would have looked if wildlife had taken over the city. So there was a street artist who had painted some things, and they were trying to do some drone pictures which they had done from above of different parts of cities in the Amazon, and that, trying to marry these imaginations to see how would Paris have looked like in a different avatar, so to speak. I think we don't need to do artist imaginations enough. All of us during the lockdown time, those of us fortunate, of course, to have food in our stomachs and a roof over our head, we've seen the differences. I would go to my terrace. My husband was saying that a kite came and sort of clipped the top of his head and went so close. I've seen crows being so bold, when they come swooping down, or bird song, so much more bird song, so many more butterflies than I've heard before. That, to me, this is something I don't want to lose. So I'm willing to fight for it a little more than I was before, because before maybe I would have just got used to the fact that cities are grey and full of pollution. So I think hopefully this is, if we know that Vrishabhavati Valley or Yamuna River can flow froth free after just 2 weeks of shutdown, can this give us a sense? Can we say that Saturdays and Sundays we should shut down, and Monday to Friday businesses can run as usual, just to give the lakes and rivers some chance to flow free? I mean, we should be thinking about these kinds. As Gayatri was saying, I think we need to get creative. This experience hopefully can push us towards that creativity. Because before, I also didn't think. I thought maybe this Vrishabhavati or Yamuna would need a year without pollution, or 6 months without pollution, to actually see the dramatic changes. But if you could see it in 2 weeks, that means nature is so powerful and so capable of regenerating herself, and we should just give that little bit of space. and maybe see if we can have weekends, for instance, for nature to breathe. Those kinds of things. Can we think differently? So I
That would
think
be
it's a
the most
lovely
ideal
question.
thing to have, actually, give the weekends to the nature. That's the
Exactly.
best we
Yeah.
can do. Stay locked down at your places and don't go out.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay,
Okay.
so why just one quick thing there. Mr. N. Ram is saying that I identified Pongiamia pinnata. It's a huge tree in front of my house, and there was a massive caterpillar. It's a lovely tree. Yeah? You should just, it's one of the best trees to plant because it does well in all kinds of environments. So that is something that you should gently try and plant.
Okay. One more question is there, actually, if you can very quickly take it from
Sure.
Raksha. I'll just allow her to talk. Raksha, would you like to take your question? Hello. Raksha, are you there? Okay. I'll
We
just
can
quickly
read
read
it.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's saying, being sensitive about environmental concerns is something that is developed, and as children, there is so much of a disconnect between what we learn in closed classrooms and our immediate world outside these walls. How do you see the role of education, say formal, in promoting or strengthening our concerns for our environment? It's a great question, Raksha.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a really good question. I mean, if you look at the CBSE curriculum, we all know ICSE and CBSE this year had to really condense their curriculum because of the COVID situation. Unfortunately, one of the things that has gone out is all the chapters on environment, climate change, biodiversity, forests, all of that has been chopped out of the syllabus. And I mean, I really understand that the syllabus has to be cut, but it is sad. So these children will grow up losing that entire knowledge of theirs. But it's all still bookish knowledge. We are doing some studies of how much do high school curricula in India tell you about climate change. It's almost nothing. Very interesting. Where it is in political science and in geography, not in physics and in chemistry or in biology, where you would expect. So we need, I think, going back to our activity time. If I'm thinking of my school days, we did this SUPW class that many of you would have had, socially
Yes,
useful
yes.
productive work. Ours was all gardening. My daughter's school, we're very lucky because it's all gardening again. They get to dig with their hands. We want, children, you're absolutely right. Children have to connect with nature in a very messy way. The first time they stand on grass which is wet, or the first time they touch mud with their hands on garbage, they're going to see ish. But that experience is important. So, some I see a couple of names on this chat also. So some people that I know had organized this plantation along the side of Bangalore Lake in what used to be a waste dump. So I know a bunch of children who went to that place, and the group that was there was teaching the children. So the children actually dug some of this trash out, scooped out troughs, and planted trees. So my daughter was part of that, for instance. And when the kids saw chips packets or small little toffees, the plastic that there was in there, they started discussing. Then they started saying, maybe the chips packet that I was eating, or maybe that plastic toffee that I was eating is wandered its way next to Bangalore Lake. And then you see a change. Now, no, they don't want to eat it. As parents, you can tell them any amount, or you yourself, in fact, might be eating those chips packets. But when the child comes back and says, it was there near Bangalore Lake, and that's our trash you're digging up, and that's going to stifle the tree, everybody stops. It's experience that changes us. So I think that giving that these education has to be through experiential learning, and that's the only way that things are going to change.
So how do we do that? Because I was also about to ask a similar question, that how do we involve the youth in our sustainability movement? Because not everybody, I mean, including me, I'm not a huge proponent of activism for that matter. So just saying that, okay, we are, not going to school until you take an action. It is very passive approach to, solving something. If you have to solve something, I think you have to step ahead and do your tiny bit, whatever it is. Do your tiny bit and do something instead of expecting somebody else to do, and you just kind of pressurize. So and in India, I have seen we have one program for the students. It is called Earth Geeks, and through that we are trying to encourage students to, grooming them to take up anything which they can in their respective comfort zones. So we are tying up with schools and students. Basically, our community that we address is the student community. Whether you are a PhD student or a class 6 student, we are taking it all in that segment. So what do you think we can do with students, because they are such a big power and they are the professionals of tomorrow?
So there are some countries, for instance, I think Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, which says that every student, high school student that graduates has to plant a tree.
Okay.
And so little things like this, since we were talking about governments, for instance, if you say, for instance, every corporate employee, some corporates do this, has to plant a tree, but not just, I think planting is one easy thing. If you're responsible for watering that tree and making sure that it grows, then you have a transformation, right? You have achieved something. So, I mean, activism is hugely important for me. I think in terms of, I think any changes that have happened in our cities have largely been because of activists forcing the change. But I completely see that many people are not comfortable with activism. So there has to be something for everybody to do. But we need to create opportunities for all of us to get out more and do things. Little things that people do. I remember one of the most nicest events that I went to was a public event in Kaban Park, where there was someone who called himself a tree whisperer. And all he did was did this workshop where for 20 minutes, people would take off their shoes and walk barefoot, eyes closed on the grass, and touch a tree with their hands, all eyes closed, and feel it. And what he said is, you're whispering to the tree, and the tree is whispering back to you. It sounds, it can sound very hokey pokey, but it's also, I think, very transformative. There are people who sing to their plants or talk to them. There are people who dig in the earth. I think, for instance, every school should do a waste trip. So know where your city's waste is thrown and go on a trip to a waste dump. When I did that for my research, it was transformative. I started composting immediately, because when you see barefoot children in a village which used to be a thriving village playing next to that stinking dump and falling sick with dengue, some of them dying, I mean, it changes you. You will really be ashamed of the waste that you produce. But that has to happen, again, personal transformation. Can't happen with a video. So send every kid, in fact, I would say every person who lives in a city, send them on a trail straight away to the waste dump. Every city has a waste dump. Go see the waste dump and then see what it does to the people around you and come back. Experiencing. If you can set these,
because you will not be able to realize the quantum of waste generated, because we always see our waste as per capita. As an individual, I'm only creating so much of waste, but when it compiles, then it's huge.
Yes.
So there's one more comment, actually, not a question as such, which is from Rajni Rao. Would you like to quickly take that comment, Rajni? Then we'll close this session. Hello?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Harini. Rajni. Yeah, nice session. I was just talking to a couple of parents today after the announcements on reducing the syllabus. Doesn't make sense. In my opinion, I think APU is already a very inclusive alternate space. So also Bhumi, Prakriya, where some of Bangalore's children go. And I think these kind of spaces are the need of the hour this year, because communities are under stress. I believe I already belong to the elitist society, and we have access to respite during COVID. We have private hospitals, we have the money, and I just cannot imagine what stress must be going through in parents, teachers' minds to get to work and do those lessons, right? Deliver your 45 minutes lessons and being watched by parents. It is huge. I mean, what is the learning outcome of after all this? I think more than cutting syllabus, we should be demanding a 0 graded year, and everybody will remember, oh, these are the 2020 kids, and that's why they all have a gap year. I mean, I wish more parents and teachers and students ask for this. I'm definitely campaigning for it at home with my children. They think I'm very weird, but I think that's the way to go, because people haven't come out of COVID, and I don't see this going off anywhere soon. And this is one time where we can actually redesign our education system, perhaps by looking at how kids from Bhumi, Prakriya, and the alternate homeschoolers, right? They had no disruption in their lives, at least with learning, because learning goes on immaterial whether schooling happens or not.
Right.
I understand teachers need to be paid, schools need to run, but that's a collective solution that we can all figure out how it happens. So that was my comment, and I want to know what your view is from also. Thank you.
My view is, I'm really torn, because I see so many sides of it, and I think there is no easy solution. I completely get what you say, and so we need to have an environment that is much less stressful on children and teachers. And really, online, we've also tried to go online, as so many others have had. It's not the ideal environment to teach, in which to teach. That said, I also know so many people from lower middle income, I would say the starting of, computer people. Many jobs in India can't go offline anyway, online anyway, but those who can at the lower level, who are getting maybe 12,000, 15,000, 20,000, many of them are women. And I also see that with their children at home and without school, they are unable to work and they are getting shunted out of. And we see this globally also. Women are getting shunted out of the workforce entirely across this entire year when the kids are at home and unless they have things to do. And I also see that kids completely miss that attention. If they don't have any way of connecting to their friends, they are getting anxious beyond a point. It was nice to have long holidays, but leaving them completely without things to do. All parents will not have the resources, the intellectual resources and the capital in terms of books at home, etc., to unschool their children. So I'm also mixed. I don't think we can go back to these full kind of classes, but I don't think we should leave children completely without a structure from, let's say, a government school system. What would that structure be? Because you can't expect parents to go bankrupt into buying, smartphones for their children, which some of them are doing at this point. So it's very confusing. I mean, the short answer is I completely get your points and I see your point of view, and I don't think there are any easy solutions. We are mumbling through, I think, at this point.
All right. So with that, we will just wrap up this session. Harini, it was great having you with us. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any concluding thoughts from your end, which you want to, leave the audience with.
So I will say this, that I'm just trying to think about it. I think 10, 15 years, I'd say now, of an urban ecology journey. Yeah. It's been a great pleasure now in the past year or two seeing how many more people are part of this. Everybody wants to do something that is different. And especially in post-COVID times, I know with webinar fatigue, all of us are sick of looking at things online. Still, there is so much interest and fascination in something about which would have been esoteric. 15 years ago, urban ecology, nobody would have been interested. So I can only say I've been very happy to have this conversation with you and to answer all these questions from people. It's been very interesting. And I'd love to hear back. My email ID, I think you just Google it, you should find it. It's harini.nagendra@apu.edu.in, if you can share it on the website.
And we do have several questions that we have already received as the response to this, webinar. So we have got several questions which we have lined up for you. So all the questions that you've answered are from the participants and we have not been able to cover them all. So
okay,
there is always room for more answers.
Sure. Sounds good. And maybe we can, I'd love to know what people are doing. I always love to know what people are doing in their own lives.
We would love to do a follow-up session, because if there is more and more, interest from the audience, we can always take up another session which answers.
Absolutely. And maybe try and get people to share some of it.
Yeah. Great.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to us. Thank you everyone else. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Harini. Bye-bye.
Bye.